And today the JSC is meeting to deliberate on the candidates who were interviewed for the Chief Justice position. This comes as a letter was received by the acting Judge President of the Supreme Court of Appeal, Xola Petse, from Professor Helen Kruuse of the Rhodes University, who objected to the proceedings. She cites the sexist nature of some questions that were posed to Justice Mandisa Maya and what she also calls unsubstantiated sexual harassment questions that were also asked of Judge President Mlambo. Let's look back then at this week's interviews in depth and see if this letter upholds any bearing at all, if at all, with Alison Tilley, who is the coordinator of Judges Matter. Alison, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Could the letter that we heard being referred to in the proceedings yesterday, which, some say may have some kind of a bearing on the discussions, could it have any, sway when it comes to how the discussions go?
Well, I think it certainly may hold sway today in the discussions in the JSC. I think what I would be interested in is whether it will hold sway with the president, because it's obviously the president who has to make a decision based on what the JSC says. And I'm not sure that it will play that much of a role in that decision. The question really in front of the JSC is who will make the best Chief Justice? And I think that's the question that we really should be focusing on. This may not be as important as it's currently being made out to be.
And one of the things that, we saw were really some tough questions being asked of the candidates throughout this entire week. I'd like us to, go to yesterday's proceedings. I mean, given some of the questions that we saw being asked, it was almost clear as to how tough the current acting Chief Justice was going to have it in that seat, especially when you look at some of the questions around judges visiting politicians. You look at the questions around holding of press briefings by some members of the judiciary. I wonder, when you look at even how he handled some of the questions around the issue around the former Correctional Services Commissioner, Mr. Arthur Fraser, how then do you think he fared on the particular hot seat? Because some say that he managed to be composed for a good 12 hours.
I think he did manage to be composed, and he dealt with a very wide range of questions, and he displayed the calm demeanour that we've come to know from the Commission of Inquiry. I think what we were looking for is perhaps an explanation of his vision for the judiciary going forward, and especially with the challenges the judiciary have, which are many, and relate to things like conduct and appointments and criteria and many issues that are not being currently addressed. And I think that was something that there weren't a lot of questions on, and he did not get that much of an opportunity to sketch out his vision for the court system as a whole going forward, which is really what the Chief Justice's role is.
And one of the things that also took center stage, as you say, was also around Justice Maya's interview. And in one article that was written by Petse Sibanda, he argues that the question when it comes to whether or not South Africa is ready for the appointment of a woman Chief Justice has exposed the world to possibly how backwards we are when it comes to transformation of the legal profession around gender sensitivity as well as parity when it comes to representation in general. I wonder, what are your thoughts on the statement?
Yeah, look, it was an embarrassing question. It's I think demonstrates that we have a way to go. What was interesting and useful possibly from the last day of the commission is that Acting Chief Justice Zondo promised to put in place a sexual harassment policy and a maternity policy for judges, which appear it hasn't been done up to now, which I think gives us also some insight into the question of women in the judiciary and what steps have been taken to actually advance transformation.
And one of the things that you talk about really was quite disturbing, especially around the sexual harassment policy. We also saw some sexual harassment questions being asked of the Judge President and, of course, being disallowed later on in the day. In your view, was this a fair ask?
Well, I think it shows up one of the real flaws in the JSC's process, because what happens is that normally complaints are reduced to writing. The candidate gets to review them before they appear. But in this instance, a complaint was sort of put via a commissioner, which is a kind of backdoor which allows complaints to be put without candidates getting warning of them, which is kind of against the rules. So I think what we're seeing is something that needs to be dealt with more broadly, not only in this instance, but in other instances with other judges. Especially
when you look at the fact that, Alison, that there was now even a very strong exchange of words between Minister Ronald Lamola as well as, Julius Malema, the commissioner there of the JSC. Such really needs, strong direction and really fast action from the acting president, doesn't it? Yes, and I think it was embarrassing. In that clip you played, you hear one of the commissioners calling on Deputy President Petse to take control of the meeting, and I think that is something that we've had Chief Justice Maya chairing meetings for some time. This is the first one that Acting President Petse, Deputy President Petse has chaired, and I think we have to say that he really wasn't in control of that meeting for some of the time. And it then, hits the nub of what was the argument for Judges Matter just before these interviews were held again, that it's going to be important to set a criteria of how far you go and so that the commissioners don't veer off from what they can and cannot be able to ask. No, it's a really important issue, and I think if any JSC interviews have demonstrated it, this round has, that if you're going to just put a group of people in a room and let them ask questions and not really have a strong framework for it, it's not going to go well. And I think everybody agrees that this round of the JSC has really demonstrated that the JSC in many ways is broken, and it needs thoroughgoing reform. And, Alison, when I was listening to the interviews and the different visions that the candidates were sharing of, the judiciary and what they could do when they come in, one of the things that was very clear is that the courts, especially some of the courts, are really in need of urgent attention. You look at the biggest challenges that the incoming Chief Justice could face. It's not only going to be leadership as well as administration, but they need to ensure that there's access to justice. I was listening to Justice Mandisa, for example, talking about how a video link in Soweto to assist residents to be able to be au fait with the processes was going to be important. You listen to Judge President Mlambo talking about a Soweto court not having water for 6 months, Palm Ridge Magistrates Court having no recording machines, which could pose a big challenge should these rulings be taken on review. This is also part of what the incoming Chief Justice is going to have to talk about and really resolve, and not only just some of what we've seen play out in the public domain. It's an enormous job, and if you look at where courts are now, certainly COVID has exposed the lack of IT infrastructure, courts with bad or no Wi-Fi, courts that aren't being renovated and kept refurbished. So even if it's down to the most basic infrastructure of the courts, there's a huge challenge for the Chief Justice coming in, as well as trying to make sure that people who at this stage they're not near courts, they can't access courts. Another problem that the new Chief Justice will really have to tackle again. And also the issue of transformation. But thank you so much for your time. It'll be interesting to see who the president really picks, because whether or not we saw what unfolded this particular week may not even have a bearing on his final decision. But thank you so much for your time. Certainly do appreciate it. That was Alison Tilley, a coordinator at Judges Matter.